Hurtgen Forest, Western Front, November 1944. Cold rain dripped through the black skeletons of trees. The morning fog hung thick, swallowing sound until it was broken by a single sharp crack. A German sniper's rifle echoing through the woods. An American soldier dropped instantly, face first into the mud. The others froze. For a moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a second shot whispered through the mist, closer this time. Every man knew what it meant. They were being hunted, pinned behind shattered tree trunks and churned earth. American infantrymen pressed their helmets into the mud, hearts pounding against the rain. The enemy was invisible, hidden behind roots, branches, or perhaps watching from a burnt-out foxhole 200 yards away. The air smelled of wet soil, cordite, and fear. Yet slowly, against every instinct for survival, the men began to move. Crawling, advancing, then standing one cautious step at a time, their rifles raised, eyes scanning shadows. Each advance is a gamble with death. And somewhere ahead, for the first time in weeks, German snipers began to realize the Americans were no longer afraid. By the autumn of 1944, the Western Front was a broken scar stretching from the North Sea to the dense forests of Western Germany. After the success of the Normandy landings and the liberation of Paris, Allied commanders believed the war's end was near. Yet as American and British divisions pushed toward the German border, optimism turned to attrition. The Wehrmacht, though battered and retreating, began fighting a new kind of war, a war of shadows, ambushes, and unseen killers. The German sniper became the unseen heartbeat of this resistance. Armed with the Carabiner 98K, fitted with precision scopes and loaded with match-grade ammunition, these soldiers were handpicked for their patience and deadly accuracy. They were not frontline attackers. They were hunters trained to bleed advancing armies one soldier at a time. From rooftops, tree lines, and ruined villages, they waited for the sound of movement, the gleam of a helmet, or the flicker of light off a rifle barrel. In the early stages of the war, German snipers had already earned a chilling reputation on the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers described them as ghosts impossible to spot until it was too late. As the fighting shifted west, the same expertise now faced the Americans and British. But on the Western Front, something was different. The landscape was smaller, closer, and more personal. Town by town, field by field, men fought not across vast plains but through hedgerows, forests, and the rubble of destroyed villages. The sniper's advantage in concealment, patience, and precision was absolute. For American infantry, trained for mobility and firepower, this kind of invisible warfare was new and deeply unsettling. When the first divisions entered the Hurtgen Forest, a maze of trees and mist along the German border, morale began to crack. Soldiers spoke of the eyes in the woods. Entire squads froze at the sound of a single shot. Every fallen comrade was a reminder that death could come from nowhere. The German command understood the psychological effect. Orders emphasized that each sniper's bullet should not just kill but paralyze entire units with fear. The doctrine was simple: 1 bullet, 1 man, and 100 delayed. To maximize terror, German snipers worked in pairs, shooter and observer, constantly shifting positions after every shot. They targeted officers, radio operators, and medics first. Their goal was to sever communication and trust, to make every soldier doubt the safety of moving forward. For days, sometimes weeks, American patrols advanced only a few hundred yards. The mud swallowed tanks. Fog grounded aircraft. Artillery could not find targets hidden among the trees. The forest itself became an enemy. In the ruined villages near Aachen and through the Ardennes line, similar scenes played out. A single sniper could halt an entire company. Commanders reported advancing through zones of silence, stretches of land no one dared cross in daylight. The U.S. Army's reports from late 1944 list sniper activity as one of the most significant factors slowing the advance toward the Rhine. Yet amid this paralysis, something began to change. American soldiers, many of them inexperienced draftees, started learning painfully, instinctively how to fight back. They studied bullet trajectories, learned to read the sound of a shot, to spot a muzzle flash through fog, to move in teams instead of lines. Combat veterans from Normandy shared lessons in stealth and deception. Small units began to bait the snipers using helmets on sticks, decoys, and calculated exposure. Others used machine gun bursts to suppress suspected positions, while scouts crept through alternate flanks. Slowly, chaos turned into adaptation. In letters home, Infantrymen began describing not just fear but defiance. "You can hear them breathing out there," one wrote, "but we keep moving. That's what breaks them." For the first time since D-Day, German snipers, once the hunters, started feeling the pressure of an enemy that refused to freeze. And as the Americans advanced deeper into the forests of Germany, that refusal to stop, to bow to fear, began reshaping the very rhythm of the war. The deeper the Americans pushed into Germany, the more the battlefield turned into a contest of nerve. The thunder of tanks and artillery still defined the war, but it was now the single isolated rifle shot, clean, surgical, and unseen, that haunted soldiers' minds. Sniper warfare was psychological. It wasn't about numbers, but about control over movement, over time, over fear itself. Every pause on the trail, every glance toward a tree line was proof that the sniper's presence was working. The American High Command knew this could not continue. Division commanders began to prioritize sniper awareness training. Manuals were rewritten. Officers were told to brief men not only on terrain and objectives, but on how to think under sniper fire. "A sniper wants you to stop," one training memo read. "Keep moving and you take away his victory." The new philosophy was simple. Movement is survival. Small unit tactics began evolving across the Western Front. Instead of long, exposed columns, soldiers advanced in broken, unpredictable patterns, one man moving while another covered. Smoke grenades became standard even in small engagements. Platoons began coordinating fire zones with machine gun teams, flushing suspected sniper nests with overlapping bursts. At the same time, U.S. Army engineers and intelligence officers began studying captured German equipment. They discovered the care and craftsmanship behind the Mauser K98K rifle's hand-fitted bolts, precise Zeiss optics, and finely calibrated triggers. Each weapon represented a culture of marksmanship dating back decades. The Germans treated sniping not as a specialty but as an art form, yet that mastery also revealed a weakness. German snipers were taught to rely on perfect concealment and long engagement distances. They were most lethal in static defensive positions. But as the American advance gained momentum, the battlefield became more fluid, forcing German marksmen to move, reposition, and fire under pressure. The U.S. Army quickly learned to exploit this. Recon teams began laying down suppressive fire in wide arcs, not necessarily to hit the sniper, but to flush him out of cover. Once the German moved even slightly, spotters could trace the muzzle flash and direct counterfire. In some divisions, American sharpshooters were formally organized into designated sniper hunter teams. Armed with scoped M1903A4 Springfield rifles, they moved silently on the flanks of infantry columns, scanning for glints of glass, disturbed foliage, or faint smoke trails. Their mission was simple: find the ghosts and end them. But the greatest transformation wasn't tactical. It was mental. For months, U.S. infantry had lived under the illusion that sniper fire was uncontrollable, that death could come from nowhere. But as training improved, as field experience accumulated, something shifted in their collective psychology. Veteran platoons began to see sniper warfare not as terror, but as a challenge, a test of discipline and composure. When a man was hit, they no longer dove for cover and waited. They marked the angle of the shot, signaled their machine gunner, and advanced by sections. One soldier described it as learning to walk through the sound of bullets. This shift spread through units like quiet defiance. Reports from the 4th Infantry Division and the 28th Division noted increased aggressiveness under sniper activity. What had once frozen men in fear was now met with methodical movement. German commanders began noticing it too. Intercepted field reports spoke of enemy units advancing with disregard for sniper deterrence. Snipers, accustomed to controlling ground through intimidation, were now being forced to retreat. The transformation had consequences beyond the forest. In the ruined cities of Aachen, Metz, and later Cologne, this new infantry psychology turned into a weapon of its own. Every street, every window could hide a rifle barrel, yet the Americans kept pressing forward, building to building, floor by floor. They no longer paused at the first shot. They answered it with coordinated, overwhelming aggression. By late 1944, the German sniper was still deadly, but his reign of psychological dominance was ending. The U.S. Army had learned to fight not by hiding from the unseen, but by advancing directly into it. And as the forests of Hürtgen bled into the frozen fields of the Ardennes, this new mindset would soon be tested on an even greater scale, one that would decide whether the Allies could truly break into the heart of Germany. The human angle. Fear. Movement and courage. There is a particular kind of silence that exists on a battlefield just after a sniper's shot. It isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. You can feel it pressing against your skin. Every rustle of leaves, every drop of rain feels like a crosshair moving across your back. For American infantrymen in 1944, this silence became a daily companion. In the Hürtgen forest, in the Ardennes, even in the open farmlands of Belgium, soldiers learned to live with an invisible presence watching them. The sniper's bullet was not just a weapon. It was a message, "I see you." Many men wrote about it later. Letters and diaries captured the same rhythm. One shot, one scream, and then nothing. For some, it broke their will. For others, it hardened it. Infantry training in the United States had prepared men for chaos, artillery barrages, ambushes, and frontal attacks. But it had not prepared them for the loneliness of being hunted. When a sniper fired, you couldn't shoot back until you found him, and finding him often meant exposing yourself to death first. That paradox, to move forward into danger instead of freezing, became the crucible of courage. Leaders understood this instinctively. Squad sergeants and platoon lieutenants began to redefine bravery, not as recklessness but as control. Keep your men moving, they were told, and fear loses its power. And it worked. Slowly, soldiers began advancing with a rhythm almost mechanical in precision. A man would sprint 3 steps, dive, wait for the shot that didn't come, then stand again. The next man would follow. They created motion where fear had demanded stillness. One war correspondent described watching a U.S. platoon cross an open slope under sniper fire near Schmidt. They did not crawl. They did not stop. They walked like men convinced the air could not touch them. It was the most disciplined defiance I had ever seen. That discipline wasn't born of arrogance. It was exhaustion transformed into resolve. After months of unseen death, men began to accept the only truth that mattered. If you stop, you die anyway. By the winter of 1944, the American infantry had quietly achieved something extraordinary, not the total elimination of snipers, but the conquest of fear itself. The technological angle. Precision against firepower in the duels that followed. Technology played its part, though not always as expected. The German sniper's weapon, the Mauser Karabiner 98K ZF-39, was a masterpiece of engineering. Chambered in 7.90 Q's 57mm Mauser rounds, it could kill cleanly at 800 meters in the hands of a calm shooter. The Zeiss scope, with its fine reticle, allowed minute adjustments for wind and distance. German doctrine emphasized patience, one shot, one kill and punished wasteful firing. Each sniper was issued a camouflage smock, face veil, and in many cases, specialized field gear for weeks of isolated operation. The best of them could remain hidden within 50 yards of an enemy patrol without being discovered. Against this precision, the Americans had speed in numbers. The M1 Garand, semi-automatic and durable, gave infantrymen the ability to fire 8 rounds rapidly without cycling a bolt. While it could not match the accuracy of a scoped rifle, its rate of fire allowed suppressive action that kept enemy snipers pinned. The distinctive ping of its empty clip became both a comfort and a curse, signaling to friends that one more man was still alive, and to snipers that a reloading moment had come. But soon, American ingenuity began to close the precision gap. The U.S. Army deployed the M1903A4 Springfield, fitted with M73B1 scopes, and trained select marksmen to hunt snipers directly. These counter-sniper teams were often composed of patient, steady men, hunters, farmers, or policemen before the war, whose civilian skills translated into deadly calm under fire. They worked methodically. When a sniper's position was suspected, they didn't rush. They studied terrain, angles, and bullet impacts. They noted whether the shot came from a low trajectory or high ground. Sometimes it took hours, sometimes days. When they fired, it was usually once and final. Meanwhile, artillery and mortar crews developed crude but effective methods of flushing out sniper nests. A single sniper shot could trigger a full battery response, saturating a ridge or tree line with explosives. Though inefficient, it denied German sharpshooters the comfort of safety. Still, the technological contest remained intimate. One rifleman against another, one heartbeat versus another. And in that quiet duel, something deeper emerged, an unspoken respect. Many American soldiers, even after the war, described German snipers as professional rather than cruel. They understood the precision of the craft. The hatred that defined most frontline fighting seemed in these rare duels replaced by a grim acknowledgement of skill. But technology could only go so far. In the end, it was the will to move to cross open ground despite the crosshairs that tilted the balance of power. By late 1944, the Germans were realizing that their finest sharpshooters were being outmatched not by better rifles, but by an enemy that refused to stop. And as those duels played out from the forests of Hürtgen to the snows of the Ardennes, another layer of the story was forming, one not of weapons or fear, but of leadership, coordination, and moral endurance. The leadership angle, command under the crosshairs' leadership in the sniper war, was not about grand maneuvers or sweeping offensives. It was about keeping men moving when every instinct told them to freeze. In the foggy hills and shadowed forests of late 1944, the measure of a commander was not how loud he shouted, but how steadily he walked forward. Platoon leaders and sergeants found themselves in the most perilous positions. Snipers sought them out first, the ones giving hand signals, pointing ahead, or wearing binoculars around their necks. A single shot could decapitate a squad's command, leaving frightened soldiers leaderless under fire. Many officers learned the hard way to become invisible. Rank insignias were removed from helmets. Medics covered their red crosses. Radios were used sparingly. The battlefield had become a place where visibility meant death. Yet in that atmosphere of danger, small unit leadership flourished. Young officers in their early 20s, men barely out of college or factory life, began to command with a blend of intuition and raw courage. They crawled beside their men, whispered orders, and led by movement rather than voice. Captain Robert Wilson of the 22nd Infantry Regiment wrote in his journal after Hürtgen, "Leadership isn't shouting forward, it's standing up first. When your men see you walk into fire and live, they follow, not because they have to, but because they believe it can be done." That kind of leadership was contagious. Even as the casualty lists grew, morale within many American platoons remained surprisingly steady. What broke men was not always danger, it was uncertainty. Good leaders, by their presence alone, erased that uncertainty. On the German side, leadership took a different form. Sniper teams often operated semi-independently, receiving general orders but choosing their targets freely. This autonomy made them unpredictable and deeply effective, but also vulnerable to isolation. As the front collapsed, many German snipers were cut off from retreating units. Some continued fighting for days behind Allied lines, their discipline unbroken even in hopeless conditions. A few surrendered only after running out of ammunition, their final reports later recovered in field notebooks, calm, precise, and chillingly detached. One wrote simply, "Enemy continues advancing. Unable to slow them. My position was compromised. Ending operation." It was the quiet handwriting of a soldier who had realized what his command already knew. The Americans were advancing not through luck, but through sheer will. Leadership on both sides had created a paradox. The Germans fought with perfect skill, the Americans with relentless momentum. In the end, it was the latter that proved harder to defeat. The moral and psychological angle, the war. Within, to understand the sniper war, one must look beyond the physical battlefield into the unseen war inside the human mind. For soldiers on both sides, this was a confrontation with isolation. Unlike artillerymen or tank crews, snipers and their targets lived in silence. They watched, waited, and killed alone. There were no front lines in that duel, only small pockets of earth claimed by fear. Psychologists studying post-war accounts later noted a curious pattern. Men who faced snipers regularly developed not trauma first, but hyper-awareness. They remembered every tree, every slope, every unnatural silence. Their senses sharpened to survive. But that same awareness, that constant readiness for death, left deep scars that many carried long after the fighting ended. And yet, amid this quiet horror, moments of extraordinary humanity emerged. In several documented cases, U.S. units captured German snipers who had been fighting them for days. Instead of hatred, what many soldiers expressed was astonishment. "He looked just like us. one infantryman said after taking a prisoner near Wassenack. Same mud, same eyes, same hands. We both hadn't slept in 3 days. This recognition that the enemy shared the same exhaustion, the same loneliness, blurred the line between hatred and respect. Sniper warfare, stripped of distance and ideology, reduced the war to its most intimate form. One man surviving while another falls. Morally, it also changed the way many soldiers saw courage. It wasn't loud or heroic anymore. It wasn't about charging machine guns or shouting orders. It was quite the courage to stand up after hearing the shot that missed. Reports from Army psychologists in early 1945 noted a fascinating transformation among veteran units. Exposure to sniper fire initially caused panic, but over time it cultivated emotional steadiness. Men who had survived months under constant threat learned to manage their fear like a reflex. They stopped reacting to it, one report concluded, and began existing through it. German accounts tell a mirrored story. Some Wehrmacht and SS snipers described watching Americans advance through bullet storms with what seemed like disregard for life. It unsettled them. They do not hide, one German wrote in his diary. Even when they know we are here, they act as if they cannot die. That illusion, the appearance of fearlessness, was powerful. It wasn't that the Americans lacked fear. It was that they had learned to master it. By early December 1944, as snow began to fall across the forests of the Eifel and Ardennes, both armies were preparing for a larger storm. The sniper duels that had defined the autumn months were about to merge into one of the bloodiest confrontations of the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge. And in that crucible, every lesson of courage, coordination, and endurance learned under the crosshairs would now be tested on a scale neither side had imagined. Hürtgen Forest, November 1944. There are few places on Earth that seem designed to swallow armies whole. The Hürtgen was one of them. A sprawling tangle of pine and fir, dark even at midday. Its floor was a choking carpet of mud, roots, and shattered trunks. The trees grew so close together that sunlight rarely touched the ground. Artillery bursts ripped through branches rather than air, raining splinters sharper than steel. Into this labyrinth marched the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, thousands of men who believed they were moving toward the Rhine. Instead, they were walking into one of the deadliest traps of the entire war. The German command, realizing they could not stop the Allied push in open battle, turned the Hürtgen into a fortress. Mines, booby traps, and concealed bunkers littered the landscape. But it was the snipers who ruled it. Hidden among the trees, they hunted every movement, every sound. At first, the forest seemed silent. Then, as the Americans advanced deeper, the forest came alive with the sound of single, distant cracks. The signature of precision death. A man would fall. Another would scream and the column would hit the ground. Minutes later, another shot. Always just one. Always from somewhere else. The first few days were chaotic. Maps were useless. Radio signals faltered in the dense canopy. The fog never lifted. Soldiers spoke of being unable to tell direction or distance, only the constant feeling of being watched. The Germans had perfected their trap. Many of the snipers were veterans of the Eastern Front, trained in camouflage that bordered on artistry. Some constructed firing holes beneath tree roots. Others climbed into the canopy, tethered themselves in place, and shot downward at impossible angles. Every clearing became a killing field. Every movement was punished, but the Americans refused to turn back. Orders from higher command demanded progress no matter the cost. What followed was not a battle of sweeping maneuvers. It was a slow-motion crawl of endurance. Infantry platoons advanced yard by yard, cutting through barbed wire with shaking hands, dragging the wounded through the mud. They began to change the way they fought. When a sniper's bullet struck, no one froze anymore. Within seconds, machine guns would rake the trees, mortars would pound suspected angles, and scouts would fan out to flank the unseen threat. It was messy, imprecise, and costly, but it was a movement. By late November, German snipers found themselves under relentless pressure. Their forest sanctuaries were being stripped away by artillery fire and flamethrowers. The Americans were adapting faster than expected, advancing in unpredictable patterns, using captured German camouflage and decoys to draw fire. One platoon near Grossau reportedly carried a wooden dummy helmet on a stick, a decoy they called George. Each time a sniper fired at it, the Americans triangulated his position and returned fire within seconds. It was crude but devastatingly effective. Still, progress came at a horrifying cost. Entire companies were reduced to handfuls of men. The mud was filled with the smell of cordite, pine sap, and death. The forest floor itself became the grave of thousands so thick with the fallen that engineers sometimes used the bodies as landmarks when laying new paths forward. But something was happening beneath the horror. For the first time, the balance of fear had shifted. The Germans, once masters of concealment, began feeling hunted. Their positions, once safe, were being discovered with frightening efficiency. Their shots, once answered by silence, now brought a storm of retaliation. An American lieutenant described the moment he realized the tide had turned. "We stopped waiting for the next shot. We started expecting to end it. That's when we knew the forest didn't own us anymore." The relentless American advance through the Hurtgen became a symbol of psychological victory as much as tactical progress. It was no longer about ground gained. It was about refusing to yield to the invisible. German reports later confirmed that Allied soldiers had sensed sniper casualties in November had tripled compared to previous months. Many were killed not by precision counterfire, but by sheer volume mortars, grenades, or close quarters combat when their positions were finally overrun. One captured sniper, interrogated near Kleinhau, admitted he had stopped firing after 3 days because, in his words, they kept coming. It was useless. The Hurtgen broke both armies in different ways, physically for the Americans, morally for the Germans. And as December approached, those who survived would march directly into the next storm, one that would dwarf even the horrors of Hurtgen, the Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. There, amid snow and smoke, the lessons of the sniper war movement, discipline, and defiance would decide the fate of thousands. Ardennes, Belgium, December 1944. Snow fell like ash across the frozen forests. The land was silent, white, and still until the horizon erupted in thunder. The German army had launched a desperate counteroffensive through the Ardennes, a surprise attack meant to split the Allied front in two. For the Americans, exhausted from Hurtgen and scattered across miles of snow-choked terrain, it was a nightmare reborn. Among the German forces were the remnants of the sniper battalions that had terrorized the Allies all autumn. They returned to their deadly craft with renewed ferocity, using snow camouflage suits and dugouts hidden beneath pine roots. The stillness of winter amplified their power. A single rifle crack echoed for miles, and the white snow betrayed every drop of blood. But something had changed since the days of Hurtgen. The Americans no longer moved like prey. From the first week of fighting, reports began to filter in stories of infantry units advancing through sniper zones, as if they no longer feared death. In towns like Büllingen, St. Vith, and Bastogne, American platoons crossed open ground under fire, maintaining formation even as bullets kicked up snow around them. The German snipers noticed. Some wrote in diaries later recovered from the battlefield. "They move through our sights without hesitation. They do not stop when we fire. It feels as if they no longer see us." That perception that the Americans had become immune to fear was not far from the truth. It was the culmination of months of adaptation, training, and bitter experience. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne was encircled, German snipers took positions along ridge lines and within the town's shattered buildings. For days they attempted to pin down movement, to reassert control through precision fire. But instead of paralysis, they met fury. The paratroopers, seasoned by Normandy and Holland, treated sniper fire not as terror, but as a trigger for retaliation. Machine guns answered instantly. Mortars blanketed rooftops. Tank crews pivoted turrets toward muzzle flashes and fired without hesitation. Every sniper's shot became a beacon of his own destruction. By mid-December, German sniper casualties skyrocketed. The Wehrmacht's own records note unsustainable losses among designated marksmen due to immediate enemy suppression response. American infantry had perfected a rhythm. Hear the shot, locate the flash, destroy the nest. The Battle of the Bulge became a graveyard not only for German armor, but for the sniper doctrine that had once ruled the war. Yet for the soldiers on the ground, the price of that victory was immense. The cold was merciless. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees C. Weapons jammed from frost. Snow clung to uniforms like ice armor. Men who had survived the forests of Germany now fought frostbite, starvation, and exhaustion on top of enemy fire. Still, they advanced. In places like Foy and Noville, the forest itself once again became the battlefield, white instead of green, but just as deadly. The Americans had learned to use smoke shells to mask movement, to create ghostly screens that hid their advances. Sharpshooters from the 2nd Infantry Division worked alongside artillery spotters to locate sniper hides by reflecting the faint glint of a scope lens betraying the invisible. Every inch of snow-covered ground was earned through discipline. Each advance became a statement. You cannot stop us anymore. By Christmas Eve, the tide had turned. The German offensive began to falter under relentless counterattacks. In the woods near Bastogne, a squad of American riflemen discovered a cluster of abandoned sniper hides, rifles still resting on bipods, scopes covered in frost. The snipers had fled. Captured German prisoners later told interrogators that many of their sharpshooters had simply given up. One officer admitted, "They said it was useless. They said the Americans would not stop no matter how many fell." That was the moment the psychological war ended. The weapon that once ruled the battlefield, fear, no longer functioned. American soldiers began turning the Germans' own tactics against them. In some sectors, U.S. sharpshooters used captured Mauser rifles to sow confusion, firing from behind enemy lines to draw return fire and expose hidden positions. In others, they used mannequins dressed in German uniforms to bait counter-snipers. The hunters had become the hunted. When the snows finally began to melt in January 1945, the battle was over. The Allies had not only survived the Ardennes, they had broken the German army's last great offensive and shattered its myth of superiority and precision warfare. In the after-action reports of several American divisions, a single phrase appeared repeatedly: "Sniper threat neutralized by aggressive advance." That phrase symbolized more than tactics. It was a testament to transformation from fear to endurance, from paralysis to motion. The German sniper, once a symbol of invisible domination, had become a relic of a dying war defeated not by technology, but by the human will to keep walking forward. And as the survivors of the Bulge trudged eastward toward the Rhine, the lesson of those frozen forests would stay with them. In modern war, the strongest weapon isn't the rifle or the scope or even the bullet. It's the refusal to stop moving. When the snow finally melted across the Ardennes in early 1945, what emerged was not victory in triumphal colors, but a landscape scarred beyond recognition. The forest that had echoed with rifle fire for months was now silent, trees splintered, foxholes filled with ice, the bodies of men half buried in frozen mud. The German army, once so confident in its mastery of defense and precision shooting, was now retreating on every front. Sniper units that had once inspired dread had been reduced to fragments. A few surviving marksmen folded into regular infantry formations or reassigned to rearguard actions. American intelligence summaries from January 1945 noted a striking detail. Enemy sniper activity greatly diminished. Those remaining show reduced morale and limited engagement. That line told an entire story. The Germans had built their sniper corps on the psychological principle that one invisible bullet could stop a platoon. It worked in 1941 on the Eastern Front, where Soviet soldiers froze in fear under the gaze of unseen hunters. It worked again in Italy and in Normandy's hedgerows. But by late 1944, that principle had collapsed. In Hurtgen and the Ardennes, the Americans had learned the sniper's language and turned it against him. They realized that movement was power. Every time an infantry squad pressed forward despite casualties, it broke the very psychology the sniper relied on. The more the Germans fired, the faster the Americans advanced. The transformation was so complete that U.S. Army manuals published in 1945 incorporated lessons learned from those forests. Field reports advised, sniper fire must be answered not by concealment, but by aggression. Advance in pairs. Force him to reveal himself. Fire and maneuver. It was doctrine written in blood, a new language of war forged by those who refused to stay down. For the Americans who survived Hurtgen and the Bulge, the experience changed everything. Many described it later not in terms of heroism, but endurance. Private Thomas Wilder of the 8th Infantry Division wrote home after the Bulge, "The hardest part isn't fear. It's forcing yourself to stand up after you've seen the man next to you fall. But once you do, you stop thinking. You just move forward." That mindset, mechanical, unrelenting, stripped of emotion, became the new identity of the Allied ground soldier in Europe. Meanwhile, the Germans faced a crisis of belief. The sniper, once a symbol of the perfect soldier, disciplined, unseen, lethal, now faced a war of movement he couldn't control. Many sniper battalions disbanded in the final months of the war. Rifles were abandoned in the mud. Optical scopes, once prized, were left behind to rust in the snow. American intelligence officers collected them as trophies, labeling each scope by manufacturer and serial number. By war's end, thousands of captured German sniper rifles were shipped to U.S. depots for study. Their craftsmanship was admired, but their purpose had already been defeated. In the broader scope of the war, this evolution symbolized a shift, from static to mobile warfare, from the deadly patience of hidden killers to the relentless pace of mechanized assault. What the Americans achieved wasn't just a tactical victory, it was psychological domination. They had proven that fear could be neutralized not by armor or artillery, but by willpower and coordination. Even German officers recognized it. In an interrogation record from the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division, one captain admitted, "They keep coming. Even after we shoot 5 or 6, the rest do not stop. It breaks our men's nerves more than theirs." That was the quiet turning point of morale, the invisible victory that would carry the Allies across the Rhine and into Germany itself. And as the winter gave way to spring, the surviving American infantry, those who had learned to advance through sniper fire, would soon face the final campaign of the European War. But what they didn't yet know was that this transformation, this hardened will forged under fire, would come at a cost far deeper than strategy or numbers, because the price of learning to walk through bullets was learning to feel nothing at all. Spring 1945. The Western Front was unrecognizable. Villages reduced to blackened stone, forests stripped bare, fields of snow now turned to mud and blood-soaked earth. The thunder of battle was fading toward Germany's interior, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the noise ever was. In those ruined woods, Hurtgen, Ardennes, Eifel, war historians and army investigators began cataloging what remained. They found German sniper nests frozen in place, rifles still aimed at the same tree lines as if the men behind them had simply vanished. And in a way they had. The German Sniper Corps, once the pride of the Wehrmacht's precision doctrine, had been bled out of existence. According to post-war Allied records, by early 1945, less than 30% of trained German snipers were still active. The rest were dead, captured or absorbed into retreating infantry formations. The Americans had recorded nearly 10,000 sniper-related casualties between Normandy and the Ardennes, a shocking figure that represented not just the cost of war, but the price of adaptation. Yet those same reports noted that by the final months of the war, sniper effectiveness had fallen by over 60%. Fear, the sniper's greatest weapon, had lost its power. American commanders noticed the change in morale. Infantry units that once froze under the first shot were now writing field reports that read like clinical manuals. Sniper eliminated. Advanced to objective. No significant delay. But that mechanical tone hid something deeper. The emotional numbness left behind by months of exposure to invisible death. Psychologists, later studying veterans of Hurtgen and the Bulge, found elevated cases of what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress. Men who had learned to advance through fire had also learned to suppress fear, empathy, and grief survival mechanisms that lingered long after the war. Corporal James Renner of the 4th Infantry Division, interviewed in 1946, said quietly, "We stopped feeling it. The fear, the loss, it just became background noise. You'd see someone go down and keep walking. It was the only way to stay alive." That emotional desensitization necessary in combat became one of the war's most haunting legacies. The U.S. Army's after-action reviews acknowledged the paradox. Courage had saved lives, but at the cost of humanity. The same reports also noted the remarkable evolution of battlefield tactics. American infantry had developed rapid sniper neutralization methods that would later influence Korean War and Vietnam-era training. Observation drills, counter-sniper spotting, smoke deployment, and communication discipline all became standard procedures lessons born from the blood-soaked woods of 1944. German commanders, interviewed in Allied custody, admitted that the sniper war had backfired. One colonel of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division stated, "We believed fear would control them, but the more they lost, the less they feared. It was like fighting ghosts." That phrase, fighting ghosts, perfectly described the final months of the Western Front. The Americans, stripped of illusion, had become what war demanded, moving machines of willpower. When the U.S. Army crossed the Rhine in March 1945, few remembered the names of the forests that had taught them how, but those who were there carried them forever. Hurtgen, Aachen, Ardennes, each a scar carved into memory. Back home, medals were awarded quietly. Reports were filed, rifles stored, uniforms hung in closets. The war was over, but the sound of a single rifle crack echoing through fog never truly left the minds of those who'd heard it. And somewhere in a forgotten corner of Europe, rusting under layers of moss and rain, lay the rifles of the German snipers who once ruled the battlefield. Their barrels still pointed toward the direction from which the Americans had come, toward the men who refused to stop. In every war, there comes a point when technology fades, and only the human spirit remains. The sniper war of the Western Front was never truly about rifles, scopes, or camouflage. It was about controlling one side's attempt to master fear, and the other's refusal to be mastered. For years, the German sniper represented the perfection of modern warfare: precision, discipline, invisibility. He was the unseen hand of terror, reshaping entire battlefields with a single pull of a trigger. But the Americans learned something timeless. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward while it still burns inside you. The forests of Hurtgen and Ardennes became laboratories of human endurance. Mud, snow, and silence replaced glory. Victory came not from brilliance but persistence, the kind that keeps walking even after reason says to stop. By the end of the war, when the rifles fell silent and the last fires went out, it wasn't superior marksmanship or tactics that had decided the outcome. It was something more primitive, a kind of collective heartbeat that refused to die. In the cold rain of those forests, the American infantry discovered a truth that transcends generations. When fear is stripped away, what remains isn't emptiness. The German snipers had aimed to halt the advance of an army. Instead, they awakened the endurance of a nation. Today, the lessons of those battles live quietly in the doctrines of every modern soldier and the patience of the scout, the calm of the marksman, the steady march of the infantryman who keeps moving through chaos. Because in the end, the story of men advancing through sniper fire is not just about war. It's about the unbreakable line between terror and courage, and the moment when humanity chooses to keep walking forward, even through the storm.